No.
What are you born? Why are you a man?
For all sorts of reasons.
For all sorts of reasons. Yeah. None of them being
well,
biological.
We just decided.
None of them being the XY chromosome. None of them being you have testicles. None of them being you have a penis. If it's just happening, like, okay, here's the morning after pill. Is that the same as an abortion?
I don't care because I don't think there's anything wrong with abortion.
Joe Rogan's been going hard against the woke left lately, especially after Kamala Harris's defeat. Known for speaking his mind and defending free speech, he's been quick to call out the craziness of cancel culture and the dangers of political correctness. With Harris losing, things are getting more intense, and Rogan is not backing down. So what does this mean for the woke movement? Will Rogan keep stirring the pot, or will the left finally push back? Here's a look at how Joe Rogan has gone head-to-head with the woke left guests who appeared on his show. Joe Rogan obliterates Thaddeus Russell's gender theory. Thaddeus Russell hopped on Joe Rogan's podcast, probably thinking his woke ideas would carry him through, but he clearly didn't see what was coming. The whole vibe flipped when Russell claimed that gender isn't biological. It's just whatever someone feels like. Joe wasn't buying it for a second. What started as a chill conversation soon turned into a total showdown, and let's just say Russell did not come out on top.
So, and this is my second disagreement with Jordan Peterson. He thinks that all the stuff in college campuses that's crazy is because of postmodernism, and he doesn't understand postmodernism. What's going on in college campuses is people making all sorts of truth claims about things like race and gender, right? I'm black, therefore I will always be this, that, and the other thing. You're white, therefore you are this, that, and the other thing no matter what, right? That is actually old, modernist, scientific racist thinking. That's what these old racist, geneticist, eugenicists thought back in the day. It's amazing. Again, SJWs are actually really, really conservative and ultimately racist.
Social justice warriors, folks. For people who don't know.
I thought your listeners must know that.
Some people don't know the abbreviations.
I just assumed that was a shorthand to use. So, postmodernism. This is where Jordan Peterson makes me want to throw chairs when he talks about this. Comes out of French philosophy in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. Michel Foucault is the most famous example of a French postmodernist.
The conversation kicked off with Russell throwing out some bold opinions and taking aim at Jordan Peterson. According to him, Peterson's got it all wrong about postmodernism. He claimed Peterson doesn't understand it, saying all the wild stuff happening on college campuses, like people making bold claims about race and gender, isn't postmodern at all. He argued that it's just old-school racist thinking wrapped in new packaging. He went on to say that things like, "I'm black, so I'll always be this," or "you're white, so you're automatic that," sound more like the outdated ideas of eugenicists than anything modern. And here's where it got spicy. Russell actually called social justice warriors conservative and ultimately racist. But then, in classic Thaddeus Russell fashion, he couldn't resist flexing his academic muscles, launching into a whole lecture on postmodernism. He said that it came from French philosophers in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, with Michel Foucault being the main guy. According to Russell, the big takeaway from postmodernism is that nothing, race, gender, whatever, is biologically determined. Everything's a social construct, and apparently, Jordan Peterson just doesn't get it.
Prior to that, prior to the 1960s and 70s, it was the dominant belief that if you were born a woman, you were going to be a wife and a mother. And if you weren't, you were doing something unnatural, right? That if you were black, you could never be the head of a business or the president, right? You could never do math, whatever. If you were white, you should do all those things, right?
Russell then got into one of his favorite rants, explaining how things used to be before the 1960s and 70s, explaining that back in the day it was a given that if you were born a woman, your life was set to be a wife and mother, and anything else was just unnatural. If you were black, forget about leading a business or running for president. You couldn't even do math, apparently. But if you were white, well, you could do it all. Everyone's fate was decided at birth, and most people just went with it.
So postmodernists came along and said, guess what? You know what we found looking at history? We found just what I said. I just gave you the whole postmodern argument right there. We looked at history and we saw, first of all, that all these categories have changed over time, which tells us that they're just inventions. And second of all, they have served the purposes of ruling elites because they get to put people in their boxes and control them more easily, right? Oh, those people over there, those are black, therefore they should be our slaves. So it's okay for us to have them as slaves. Those women over there, we don't want them, working for NASA, so we will have a rule against women working for NASA, whatever it is, right? So postmodernists said, none of this is biological, none of this is inevitable. You are now free to do what you want as an individual. It was a liberating moment. It has become the dominant way of thinking in academia, and I have to say, in my view, it is the supreme achievement of academics.
That's when the postmodernists swooped in and completely flipped the script. They argued that all those rigid categories, gender roles, race, what people could and couldn't do, weren't natural at all. They were just man-made inventions that changed over time. And the best part, those categories served the elites, making it easier for them to control everyone. Black people were put in boxes to justify slavery, and women were kept out of NASA just because. So Russell claimed that postmodernists basically said none of this is biological. You're free to be whoever you want. It was, in his view, a liberating moment in history, one that reshaped academic thought and ultimately became the dominant ideology in academia. For Russell, this shift in thinking was nothing short of the supreme achievement of academics. Until now, Russell was making some sense, blending history into his claims to prove his points. But what he said next turned out to be more dumb than shocking.
So the trans movement, for instance, right, that started from postmodernism. That whole idea, right, is that, if you were born with a penis, you're a man and you should do X, Y, and Z with your life. Right? The trans movement needed postmodernism to make that intervention and say, no, that's not true, right? You can actually be a woman because woman is an invention. It's a social construct. What much of the trans movement now is doing, which makes me so sad, is that they're saying that I am biologically, essentially, naturally, in my core, a woman. No, no one is. No one is. You can't, the whole point of this movement used to be that you get to choose your gender or choose not to be a gender. You get to move around. Your destiny is not determined for you. What a lot of the trans movement now is doing, is a good word, reifying. They're making these ideas, these abstractions real again. They're making these claims that are similar to Sam Harris's claims and to old racist claims and to old sexist claims, that if you're born a particular way biologically, this is who you are. Right? Because you've heard a lot of trans people say this, right? I was born a woman. That's what they often say. What I'm saying is, no one was born anything.
With the confidence of someone who just wrote the first encyclopedia, Russell dove into the trans movement, tying it all back to postmodernism. He explained that postmodernism was the game changer, arguing that gender isn't something you're born with, it's a social construct. Back in the day, if you were born with a penis, society had a set script for you. You were a man, and your life path was already mapped out. But postmodernism flipped that on its head, saying gender is something you get to choose for yourself. If you're born male, but you feel like a woman, you can be one. But here's when it got even more interesting. Russell wasn't happy with how things have turned out. He pointed out that a lot of trans people now say they're biologically, essentially naturally women, and he thinks that misses the whole point of postmodernism. The original message was all about freedom. The freedom to define your gender however you want, or even reject the idea of gender altogether. Instead, he felt like the movement started making gender a fixed thing again, like the old sexist and racist ideas that biology determines who you are. Russell pushed back hard, saying no one is born anything. And Joe, he wasn't buying any of it.
You don't think that some women are born women and you don't think you're born a man?
No.
What are you born? Why are you a man?
For all sorts of reasons.
For all sorts of reasons.
Yeah.
None of them being
well,
biological.
We just decided.
None of them being the XY chromosome. None of them being you have testicles. None of them being you have a penis. None of them being the fact that you generally gravitate towards male activities like boxing, kickboxing, aggressive things.
We just went through this whole thing.
No, you didn't.
Yoel Romero and Andy Dick.
Yeah, but you.
Why are they both men?
But you're a man.
Yeah.
Right? We're not talking about the broad spectrum of masculine behavior. We're talking about no one is born a man. You're not born a man. I'm not born a man.
I'm saying that I think
we're getting silly.
With his signature wit and a sharpness that could cut glass, Joe Rogan fired back at Russell, questioning whether he truly believed that no one is born with a biologically determined gender. He hit Russell with the classic, "Why are you a man?" Russell, trying to hold his ground, replied with, "For all sorts of reasons." But Joe wasn't letting it slide that easily. He pressed, asking if none of those reasons had anything to do with biology. And Joe didn't stop there. He went for the jugular. He asked if none of Russell's reasons for identifying as a man had anything to do with the fact that he has male organs or enjoys typically masculine activities like kickboxing or combat sports. Russell, clearly scrambling, tried to back up his ideas with some strange examples, like Yoel Romero and Andy Dick. But Joe wasn't having it. He cut him off, pointing out that they weren't talking about a random list of masculine behaviors. They were talking about Russell's claim that no one is born with a biological gender, and in typical Joe fashion, he wrapped it up by calling Russell's ideas silly. Ouch.
I think it's the category of man becomes meaningless.
Does it?
Yeah, we just did this, man.
No, we didn't. We definitely didn't do
Yoel
this.
Romero and Andy Dick are both
it's a broad category. The lines get blurry at the ends of the spectrum, and I think they cross over. The male-female lines do cross over when you get to that Kenyan runner and Andy Dick.
Yeah, but I'm saying it's so broad that it becomes, to me, pretty damn meaningless.
Well, the numbers are incredibly small at those crossover marks.
But Russell, ever the stubborn soul, wasn't ready to give up, even when it was clear his argument was running on fumes. Like most woke folks, he kept pushing, but at that point his brain seemed to be working at the speed of a tortoise, and the conversation was quickly spiraling into absurdity. But this was just one of many woke guests Joe had encountered, and the next one, well, they took things to a whole new level of ridiculousness. Joe Rogan annihilates Josh Zepps on abortion. When Josh Zepps appeared on one of the episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience, things got pretty intense, and he got into a back and forth with Joe on the topic of abortion. While Joe was citing his concerns that abortion is more likely the murder of a baby than a medical procedure, this man tried to push his woke thoughts in, and what happened next was something no one saw coming.
But isn't this like life in general?
Yeah.
It's slippery.
Yeah.
There's I mean, it's like we were talking about with abortion. Like, what is it? Is it killing a baby?
Yeah.
Or is it a medical procedure?
Yeah.
You know
Can we all just agree that it's both? No, I don't understand why there is, especially in this country, like it's so polarizing here. You know, this is not a debate. Well? No.
Oh, come on, man.
No.
Dawkins had tweeted something about it, that there was nothing that's people, like a human embryo was essentially the same thing as a pig embryo. It was like some ridiculous comparison to abortion.
Look,
I was like,
the religious right will always be crazy about the things that it's crazy about, and people will always get offended on Twitter when Richard Dawkins tweets something that's unpopular.
Zepps tried to tell Joe that everyone should just agree abortion is both a medical procedure and murder, claiming the topic was too polarizing in the United States. Joe asked him if it was as polarizing in other countries, and his response? A blunt no. But Joe wasn't going to let that slide and shot back with a tweet from Richard Dawkins that set the media on fire, where Dawkins compared a human embryo to a pig. Zepps, however, wasn't about to back down. He brushed it all off, saying religious people always get too worked up over these issues. As for Dawkins, well, Zepps argued, when someone like him tweets something unpopular, it's no big deal. Just another example of people getting riled up over nothing.
In the States, the conversation around abortion is uniquely different from the way that it is in Europe and in Australia. It's much more of a fault line issue. And I wonder whether in hindsight it wouldn't have been better for Roe v. Wade not to actually have been decided by the Supreme Court that way.
What?
Well, just because, I don't know, people are going to hate me for this as well.
You fucking cisgender piece of shit.
I believe in abortion.
With your surrogate mama.
I believe in abortion rights, but I don't believe that that you can find in the Constitution of the United States a right so inalienable that the Supreme Court, like, where is it in the Constitution? The Supreme Court said there's a right to privacy, therefore there's a right to abortion because we don't want to interfere in women's affairs. But that presupposes that the embryo isn't a human. you don't have the right to privacy to kill somebody, right? I mean, if I go into a room, my right to privacy doesn't extend to me being able to get away with killing a baby. The question of whether or not it's a baby is the relevant question.
Right.
That's not addressed at, in Roe. So I think that it should be legal, but I think that it should be legal through the legislative process. I think that is a legitimate democratic aspiration for people to be able to, and if it means that it's not legal in Alabama because a majority of people in Alabama don't want it, I don't think the founding fathers would have a problem with that.
Zepps then talked about how the abortion debate in the United States is different from places like Europe and Australia. He pointed out that in America, abortion is a much more divisive issue, and he even wondered if Roe v. Wade should have been decided by the Supreme Court at all. While Zepps is in favor of abortion rights, he doesn't think the United States Constitution guarantees that right. He explained that the Supreme Court based its decision on a right to privacy, but he feels that doesn't really justify the right to end a pregnancy, especially if the fetus is considered a human being. Zepps made the point that privacy shouldn't mean you can just take a life, comparing it to how privacy doesn't protect someone's right to commit murder. He believes abortion should still be legal, but thinks it should be up to the legislative process, not the courts. Zepps argued that letting states decide, like Alabama deciding not to allow abortion, fits better with democratic principles. He also suggested that the Founding Fathers would likely have been okay with states having the power to make these kinds of decisions.
I can understand a woman being upset that a man with no stake in the game is stepping up and saying that a woman should or should not be able to have an abortion.
Well, why? I mean, how do I have stake in the game of whether or not, for example, murder should be legal?
Well, okay, this is not that. This is something different. This is
No,
someone.
it's not.
If there's
It's not
like
something
three
different.
cells
It's a
in the
moral
body,
question.
It might be to you, but it might not be to them. If it's just happening, like, okay, here's the morning after pill.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the same as an abortion?
I don't care because I don't think there's
'Cause
anything
you
wrong
can't
with
get
abortion.
pregnant.
No, I don't think there's anything wrong with
But
abortion.
sure there
Things got even more interesting when Joe Rogan said that a woman's concerns about a man who has nothing to do with pregnancy spawning out of nowhere and trying to tell women whether or not they can have abortions was something that he completely understood. Zepps, however, countered back, asking Joe why men have the right to speak on the issue of whether or not murder should be legal but not on abortion. The nonsense had started to slip through and Joe sensed it. He tried to tell Zepps that he's talking about a completely different narrative, but Zepps insisted that he was just asking a moral question. Then Joe threw a curveball, asking whether the morning after pill, which is used for birth control, is the same as abortion. Zepps' response was a bit off the wall as he shrugged it off, saying, "I don't care because I don't think there's anything wrong with abortion."
If it's a 9-month-old baby, the baby's in there and it's about to come out the next day, you decide to open her up and stab it in the head?
This is what I'm arguing for, is a kind of incrementalism, which you were just alluding to, right? It's not a black or white thing. Why can't we all appreciate that it's both? Because it's become so polarized in the United States that both positions are bullshit. And people on both sides know that both positions are bullshit. It's bullshit to say that it is just a women's health issue and has no ethical implications whatsoever, even if, as you say, you're talking about cutting a woman open at 9 months and stabbing the embryo in the head. It's also bullshit to say that the instant an egg is fertilized, that is a person that should have all of the rights to life that an adult should have, and that it's murder to kill a blastocyst that's smaller than the size of the head of a pin.
Right. It's
Both
very
of those positions are
complicated.
stupid. This is an incremental situation.
When Joe asked Zepps what he thought about abortion in the 9th month, Zepps responded by saying that was exactly the point he was making. He claimed Joe was misinterpreting his beliefs and went on to ask why people can't just accept that abortion is both a health issue and, in some cases, murder. Zepps argued that the topic had become way too polarized in the United States, with both sides turning into nonsense, and that everyone on both sides knew it. He then said it was nonsense to claim that abortion is just another women's health issue with no ethical implications, but also pointed out the absurdity of arguing that a barely developed embryo should have the same rights as an adult human. Zepps remarked that calling it murder to end a pregnancy involving something smaller than the head of a pin seemed ridiculous. His choice of words when describing a human embryo was strikingly harsh, coming across as unnecessarily violent in tone.
Life evolves, it grows, a fetus grows, it becomes a human being. I mean, Peter Singer, the great philosopher, also an Australian, says that under certain conditions, infanticide, the killing of babies, should be legal and could be ethical.
Well, he's an animal nut. He loves animals more than he loves people.
But he makes a legitimate point, which is that, why does it make a difference?
To back up his stance, Zepps brought up Peter Singer, the Australian philosopher Joe referred to as someone who supposedly loves animals more than people. Zepps pointed out that Singer had argued under certain circumstances that infanticide, killing newborn babies, should be legal. Joe quickly snapped, labeling Singer an animal nut who had no real sympathy for his fellow humans. But Zepps wasn't ready to back down. He insisted that despite Joe's criticism, Singer's points were legitimate. Zepps then went a step further, implying that abortion, whether in the early stages of pregnancy or at 9 months, could be seen as the same thing as killing an infant just a day after birth. Zepps' support for abortion, coupled with his careless statements in defense of the idea that infanticide should be legal under certain circumstances, revealed how deeply his views had been influenced by what some might call the woke disease. But this isn't just Zepps' point of view. It mirrors the extreme stance of Kamala Harris's supporters and left-wing activists who push for radical pro-choice policies with little regard for the moral implications. With Kamala Harris losing terribly to Donald Trump in the presidential race, these outrageous woke activists had monstrous breakdowns, feeling devastated for not being able to control the elections. So what does this defeat mean for these liberal lefties, and why are they reacting this way? Defeat of the woke machine. Kamala Harris's defeat in the 2024 elections didn't just mark the end of her presidential run, it signaled the collapse of the woke movement that had so fervently backed her. For months, Kamala was touted as the candidate who would champion progressive ideals. Everything from taxpayer-funded gender surgeries for prisoners to expanding abortion rights. But in the end, her campaign was far more about symbolic gestures than real change, and when the dust settled, it was clear that the country wasn't buying it. Meanwhile, the left-wing meltdown that followed was nothing short of dramatic. Take these ladies, for example. They thought demolishing personal stuff was a better way to make a point than just handling things like mature human beings. They smashed their TV like it would somehow take them back in time and revert the election results. And the madness didn't end with smashing TVs or throwing fits. Some women took it a step further, shaving their heads in a dramatic protest against Trump's win and calling it the 4B movement. It was a desperate attempt to seek attention, which they did get, but not in a good way at all. So what went wrong? Harris's strategy, which leaned heavily into woke policies like pro-choice stances and radical social reforms, was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, these positions galvanized the most progressive factions of the Democratic Party, but on the other hand, they alienated key swing voters, including moderates and independents, who were more concerned about kitchen table issues than cultural debates. Her campaign had all the right buzzwords but lacked the substance voters needed. It became obvious that many Americans were growing tired of the constant focus on identity politics without any real solutions for everyday problems. And then came the breakdown. When Trump clinched victory, the response from Harris's liberal base was a mix of disbelief and anger. This wasn't just a political loss, it was a crisis of ideology for the woke left. The policies they had rallied behind, like free gender reassignment surgeries for prisoners and expanded abortion access, suddenly felt out of touch with the concerns of many Americans. While Trump's campaign focused on pushing the economy and traditional values, Harris's platform failed to address the financial strain felt by the average voter. The woke left had spent years pushing a progressive agenda with lofty promises, but the 2024 election revealed just how far removed it had become from the mainstream. It's as if the left had built a castle in the sky, focused more on social justice symbolism than practical governance. When Harris' campaign couldn't deliver on these expectations, her supporters were left scrambling for answers. But that's not all. Harris's shift to the center didn't help either. In an attempt to gain support from moderate voters, she distanced herself from her progressive roots, running on promises like appointing Republicans to her cabinet and aligning with figures like Liz Cheney. While this might have seemed like a smart move to some, it backfired. Her original base, the progressive woke left, felt betrayed. They had backed her for being the candidate of change, only to watch her pivot into a more traditional, centrist mold. This confusion about her political identity further muddied her message and alienated her supporters. Then came the emotional aftermath. The left had a full-on meltdown. Liberals who had pushed for years for a progressive utopia now found themselves questioning their political strategies. What had they done wrong? Why had their most cherished policies failed to resonate with the majority of voters? The media was flooded with op-eds and commentary analyzing why their woke movement had collapsed in the face of a Trump resurgence. The lesson here is clear. Identity politics without a solid foundation of economic and practical solutions can only take you so far. While Harris may have captured the heart of progressive social justice warriors, she couldn't bridge the divide to the broader American electorate, who were more concerned with jobs, security, and the economy. As her supporters watched the results pour in, it was clear that their vision of a progressive, woke America wasn't ready for the mainstream, and that left many of them questioning the future of their political movement. As the dust settled, Harris' loss revealed a deeper crisis within the left. The progressive agenda, once seen as the future of American politics, now seemed disconnected from the concerns of the broader electorate. For years, the left had championed bold social reforms, but those ideas fell flat in the face of voter priorities like jobs, security, and economic stability. The defeat forced many to reevaluate not just Harris's campaign, but the entire direction of the movement. Was the focus on social justice enough, or had the left overlooked the practical needs of everyday Americans? In the end, the defeat wasn't just a loss for Kamala Harris, it was a defeat for the woke movement that had pushed such divisive far-left policies. With Trump now heading back to the White House, it's anyone's guess how the Democratic Party plans to rebuild after this setback. For the woke left, it's time to regroup and reconsider whether their vision of social justice is the answer, or if it's time for a new approach to connecting with the American people. So what do you think this election loss means for the future of progressive politics? Is this the end of the woke agenda, or will the left find a new way forward? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.